All right, peace and quiet. So there's a cash out request that consists of a token, bounties, right? That may be okay, but there's uncollected deliveries given a token. So how do you want to do this? Okay. Maybe we should have some order. Something like that. We need to make sure one thing's not muted. Make sure it's live. Okay. So uncollected deliveries. And do I really want to have that name, or should I just say uncollected? I don't know. Token, uncollected. I feel like this is probably better. Maybe. There was a cash out request. It's not even in here yet. Okay. Order account from account, transfer funds. Yeah, so we can probably throw this over here. Doesn't know what a token is. Do I even have a token in here? Throw that in here. Doesn't know what the API key is. Type API key equals string. Okay. This is a uncollected. I'm actually liking my naming convention so far. Okay. Then what? If we go to our courier payroll service, we have uncollected deliveries, given the courier token. There's some other things we probably want to do. we probably want to verify type verify transaction ID. We probably want to verify that the transaction ID exists. So you have a uncollected delivery. You have a delivery receipt, which you have a delivered ID. Okay. So given we probably want this to be a verified transaction ID request. Something like that. And if that happens to be successful, then we'll have what would it be? It'll just be an okay or a result of this is already a sync result, right? And so it would be a result of both, something like that. Okay. So we have a verified transaction request that we want to create. So we say type verified transaction request equal, and there's a delivered ID equals should be a delivered ID. Okay, something like that. And there's a token like that. Okay. That delivered ID probably needs to match the courier ID. Not only do you have to have should there be a delivered ID and amount? Or can it just be, would it just a delivered ID suffice? If you say, hey, here's the delivery ID, and here's the amount. I don't know, I'm not sure if this is really needed. Okay. So we have that in here. which means that we could probably go to our data gateway. And we can then say, I can get rid of this deposit and withdrawal right here. And I could say, let request what? Request confirmation of, in this case, your confirmation is going to be a, what do we call it? Verified transaction ID. Function takes request, and I just noticed something. This is a request too, and this is a request too. Okay. We'll do something like that. So is it request confirmation or is it request verification? Oh, that's a good question. What's the difference between to verify versus to confirm? I feel like we want to verify. We want to verify the details. You want to confirm an event. That's the way I look at it. So I say verify, request verification. Request this is payroll, right? So maybe verification is good enough. Maybe I don't have to say like request verification or request receipt verification. Maybe this is good enough. And verification of what? You get a verified transaction request. Okay. So what does that really mean? Well, hey observer, when you're verifying a verified transaction request, then what does that really mean? There's a delivered ID, right? And what else does this request have? As a token, right? So we could say let courier ID equal this right here is a delivered ID. That, and I guess I can act like I'm cool and do something like this right here. Okay. And that would be, this would really be a user ID because we don't know if that's an admin ID or a courier ID. I mean, it says access to courier ID, so I guess I'll change it back. And okay, so you have the, you know what? Well, what you want to do is you probably want to say we want to integrate with some API, and we want to specifically we want to integrate with the Stripe API, and we want to ask the Stripe API if there is if a if a confirmation number exists, and if there's an amount that matches that confirmation number, right? That confirmation ID. It's not really confirmation ID. It's a transaction ID. So we want to ask the Stripe API, does this transaction ID exist, and for how much? That seems reasonable, right? So you want to essentially say, phone's ringing. Oh, I gotta grab that. And of course, it's a spam call. Okay, so the way I'm thinking about this is there's going to be like let transaction ID equal, and you're basically taking the delivered ID, and you're feeding it a some like request transaction, and okay, let's just be specific. We're requesting the Stripe transaction. But do we really have to say Stripe, or can we just say request? I don't know what you want to call it. Platform transaction. We'll just call it Stripe transaction for right now. I feel like I shouldn't be this detailed in regards to the implementation details at this scope, but I can't think of a reasonable enough name. Okay. So that would probably be under query, right? So there's a let, and then transaction, query transaction. Okay. And I'll probably have to do a request transaction, something like that. And this would be a request. This would be a request that for right now just returns a. Why is this rocket science? Right now it's going to return an error. Okay. So what is request transaction function type actually mean? Well, type request transaction could be a we're going to say transaction request. Okay. Well, what's the difference between verify transaction ID and request transaction. I don't know yet. So we're not going to delete anything. We're just going to keep going. Okay. So we can define what a transaction request is and maybe delete it later. Transaction request is you're given a token. Okay, so hold up. What really is the difference between a transaction request and a verified transaction request? Verify will probably have an amount. Well, you got to know what that amount is for. Okay. And so, well, if that's the case, then maybe we can just have a transaction request here, and then we just have this here. So that's going to be the transaction request, and then we just have the amount right here. Okay. That is making sense to me so far. So request transaction means that a transaction request is submitted and you get a transaction back. For right now, I don't know what this is really going to be named. I don't know what's going to be named yet. But let's keep going with it. And let's say that a transaction, transaction ID is we have type string, right? Or we can just introduce a type alias and say that our type transaction ID equals a string. Okay. So then down here, we can say this right here. All right. And this is like really our Stripe API. Okay. Okay. And then what? There's an amount. Maybe. It sounds like it's a good idea to have an amount on here. Okay. So the question is it an amount or is it a delivery request? Well, in this case, we are verifying that there is a transaction that has taken place that we actually processed like a payment method on, right? When I say payment method, like a bank card. And so in that case, a bank card doesn't really care that much about the details of what was purchased. That's not what the emphasis is on. But instead, the emphasis is placed on the amounts and the actual like transaction ID with that third party that processed it. That's the thought process. So this appears okay so far. Transaction ID, and then, so Okay, so when we request a transaction, we have a token and we have our delivered ID. Given our delivered ID, there's probably going to be a database that we're going to need. That is, and this could just be visual, but there will probably be a database that I can create to quickly let me see what's all this. Is it spinning up the emulator first? Or do I have to actually run that? It looks like I may have to run it. But you think that this application would launch the emulator? Okay, I think it probably did. Okay. And it's still taking a while. Okay, so say Azure, it should be an Azure emulator. Watch that. I don't know if that actually did anything yet. Okay, so the emulator is running. Now what? I should be able to refresh this periodically. Chat. Okay. Why is this taking so long? Okay. So here, like this would be the transaction ID. No. This captured ID. It looks like it's the same. It is. It's the same. It looks like the same ID. So the way that that can't be right. PI is payment intent ID. A capture ID needs to either be bool, like is captured, right? That should be the column name, or it should be a literal ID that's separate from this payment intent over here. And then we need to, we have the amount right here. Okay, so that's fine. Okay. So we have this token. Boom, we get a transaction back. And is it really a transaction ID or is it a capture ID? It's like I'm saying, is it like should I really rename it to this right here? If I name it to that right there, we're sincerely we're hard coding our Stripe integration, and we're hard coding that a bank card was used. And it doesn't have to be a bank card. Right now it's a bank card, but like if I want to future proof this for like 36 months from now, it could be a Bitcoin ID or a transaction ID. It can be who knows what. It could be some like gift card that well, it could be a gift card, whether it's a gift card that I create myself for this platform, or it could be like an Amazon gift card or something like that. Well, Amazon gift card doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean. So capture ID won't work. Transaction ID seems like it will. Okay, and so I feel like this table is good enough for right now because we have the amount and we have capture ID. Okay, so if we go to over here, query transaction. Why does this look different? What did I have earlier? I thought sounds all right. Mm, mm. Just request. Okay, that's where I had it at. Okay, so is it request transaction versus query? If you query something, then I feel like you're expecting multiple results. If you request something, I feel like it could be one or more. Uh, so I don't know. Ooh, it's really overloaded, right? We have this. Okay. So now what? I feel like we have the same thing right here. Um, just something like that. And now that you have your delivery ID and your query ID, then we could say, do I have yeah, I don't have that stuff in here right now. That's not what I was looking for. All right, let's bring in the guns. Let's take our Azure tests. Let's do some copy paste of some Azure storage table operations. Have I completed 30 minutes of this yet? Yeah, I'm at 33 minutes. Okay. And I'm curious if I should just take this, delete the query, and just rely on this request. Okay. In regards to Azure tests, I need table operations. So we're going to copy paste that. I feel like something's not right though. Yeah, okay. Copy paste that, add that to our courier payroll. So let's say we'll call this file table ops. Just fill it out. Table operations. paste that in here. Make sure that we stick to our naming convention for the namespace. Which is this over here. Okay. Then we got to do all this Azure storage stuff. All right, so edit. Where's edit project? We'll do. I don't think I have to do Azure storage blobs. I don't think that's necessary. I don't. Go in here and we'll add that because it's not going to show up in NuGet because it's been deprecated. I have to deal with that on another time. So if we look, this is under item group, package reference. So we'll just copy this whole thing. Something like that. And then we'll do this. Get rid of the blob part. And honestly, I think we should get rid of the blob part over here too. Put it out like that. Okay. Let's go to the payroll, close that. Control Shift B. Now what? We know that we are looking at not an event entity, but a payment intent. There's also a request ID, payment intent ID, but let me see. There should be a number of entities in here. No, hold on. I'm on the wrong part. There should be a number of entities in here. Order entity, subscribe entity. I bet you. Give me a second. If I look at the bank card transaction service, it'll be in here. So over here, we should have a Azure entities. Here we go. These are entities that I'm interested in. Go back to our career payroll, and we can throw you right over here. Okay. Control Shift B. Okay. This wants a request transaction request delivered ID. And then this would be the same thing. Okay. Which maybe I should just put this transaction request equal that, and then I could do that right there. Okay. Now what? We want to get the transaction ID. So we want to get the transaction, right? So in order to do that, we need to create a transaction request. So, which, hold up, this is it right here. Okay. So it's supposed to look like that. And then we can say request transaction. Or you can say try get transaction, whatever. Whatever this is, it's going to more likely be wrapped in a match with, it'll be a error message, which will just return that error message. Else, if it's okay, then we have that transaction that we can do something with. All right. So that transaction is I just realized this whole thing is not wrapped in a async block. Okay. So this verify transaction ID, what do you want to do? You probably want to say, give me a second. Right now, we can return the error, but yeah, we get rid of this right here. But if we really wanted to verify it, then we would say that let verify equal, and it would be something like transaction dot. There should be an amount, right? Which transaction is not defined yet. Well, let's imagine that it was defined. All right, so let's do this. Let's do that. Why aren't you showing up? Data transfer dot transaction. Open. Hold up. This isn't what I expected. Spec is in here. That's why. Of course, this is going to break everything. So courier payroll service. Should be something like that. Data. Open courier payroll service. Why is this not doing what I expect? Courier payroll service I did transfer. Just went over and import. That right there. Okay. And I don't know why this is. This one takes too many arguments or is used. You may take too many arguments uncollected. Oh, I know why. I know why. So we can say operations dot. Why don't you want to work with me, dude? Do that. That should work. Okay. So, a second observer. Okay. Add you over here too. Okay. And still haven't defined what request transaction means. It's this right here, right? So, okay. So now that transaction is listed. And now what do we want to do? We want to say that verified equals transaction dot amount equals, and I would assume it'll be a request or it'll be a transaction. Oh, how does this work? There'll be a request dot amount. Yeah. And so then you can say there's a couple things, right? It's verified amount, and then it's why does this look off? Something's not right. Okay, the line. Okay. All right. So you have a verified amount, and I assume that this will fail. This transaction request will fail if you don't have the ID. That's what I assume, right? So what I mean by that is like it doesn't make sense for me to say let verified ID equal, and then you say transaction ID equal request dot, and then transaction request dot delivered ID. Like the only way that you can get a transaction ID is from this delivered ID. And this ID is, well, it should be, I think it's a type string, but I mean, behind the scenes, it's a GUID, right? So I don't think this part is necessary. And so theoretically, I should just be able to say, okay, and just return this condition right here, right? So you say, okay, and sync result bool. I feel like this should be okay. All branches must return. Did return. What are you talking about? All branches must return values the same type. Yeah. Bool error description. So I'm not sure what this is complaining about. Apparently, it's okay if I do this. All right, fine. Something like that. But then I don't even use this delivered ID, courier ID. Well, I'm curious if I could just put this right here. Okay. All right, so we want to verify the transaction ID, and we want to verify that it hasn't been collected. That's something else that we want to do. Okay. So go back over here, and we'll change this. We'll say let amount verified equal this. Okay. But then we'll also say like let uncollected verified equal, and that's where we need to take this transaction and ensure that that transaction, the bounty on that transaction hasn't been paid, right? So what would you do there? Bounty not paid, penalty not paid. That's probably the name that I'm going to use. And it would be a transaction that goes to is uncollected. All right. That's what it would probably look like. So you have like something like match with, and then error message. You just return error message. But if it were okay, then you would have a is not collected, and then you would just have a is not collected, and amount verified. That will happen to okay. You would just something like that, or you could just say return okay. You do something like that. Okay. And if that is still an issue with the backwards operator thingy, then you do something like this. Okay. So this is uncollected. That's not defined anywhere yet. So that could probably look something similar to this, where we say is uncollected, and you have this transaction request. That's it. Okay. So then we can define that probably over here is uncollected, and then oh no, we'll figure out what that is later. Okay. And then transaction request goes to transaction. And I did that wrong. This, oh, because it has the same name. Okay. Is collected. Okay. Says type mismatch. Transaction does not match type. Transaction request. So this is true. So it is uncollected since a actual transaction like that. What's the transaction request? Token delivered ID. Transaction is transaction ID and amount. Yeah, transaction request. So as uncollected, I'll give it a transaction request, which there's a token and a delivered ID. Okay. So shift B. So this request transaction, boom. I feel like I only need to do return. So why wouldn't that work? Why wouldn't that work? We go back. We want to do a verify. We have a request. We get a transaction that has the amount, has a detail in it. Understand that. Um, sensitivity. And then what? Request is uncollected. Okay, that looks fine. I still got to define what is uncollected, how that gets implemented. And it's probably be implemented by relying on the event store, and I should really be relying on the event store, regardless. I'll put that in my comments. Rely on event store for this. I'll check in what I have for right now. Yeah, I hit 1 hour like on the dot. So say partial scaffolding for verifying uncollected uh, deliveries before or pre-cash out. Pre-cash out. Okay. This I'm sure get refined even more, but this is some progress. No, see ya. Bye.